Alright everyone, after months of waiting, it's here. Part 2 of The Adventures of the Traveling Torches. If you didn't watch Part 1 back in March, I highly recommend pausing now and heading over to take a look. This story picks up directly after the previous. After Winter travels to Kosa, meets Keebly, and helps defend him from assassins, despite being extremely annoyed by him. The two of them decided to head to Zeros, the city Vulture fled to and took control of when Thorn ousted him from the Scorpion Den, to take revenge on the dragons responsible for the death of Winter's brother. However, Keebly's neglected to mention a few key facts, including his own relation to Vulture. Zeros was much smaller than Kosa, and even the Scorpion Den. It was bigger than a village, but not by much. Though it was night when they flew in, the light of one full and two partial moons had allowed Keebly to pinpoint the large, squat stone compound at the center of the other smaller buildings. He wasn't certain where Vulture would be, but he could certainly guess. Now, he and Winter were somewhat comfortably established at the smallest inn they'd seen from above. Despite the late hour, the hearth inside still glowed warmly, and a few other patrons lingered, nursing drinks and talonfuls of roast dates. Winter drew enough attention already, with his pristine white scales. Did he not understand how much a little dirt could do to hide someone? And expensive sword. Keebly had kept his head down since they landed, and was now ducking into the Icewing's shadow. Here in a new city, he was less likely to be recognized. All the assassins and hunters looking for him directly were probably all still muddling about in Kosa. He would probably be fine, unless he happened to run into anyone from the bad old days. Better not to take any chances. Which had, he recalled, been almost exactly Thorn's argument when she first sent him to languish in Kosa. A new city where dragons didn't recognize him on sight, and everyone in the streets wasn't a friend, sibling, partner, or business associate of the Talons of Power. It had gotten pretty bad for him in the den, he supposed. Thorn had the benefit of followers who adored her, years of prowess with and without weapons, and a reputation for someone who finished fights. Keebly was small, he always had been, and scrappy, and known for sneaking around and, as often as not, losing fights, to his siblings, to his grandfather's talons. Smooth words and smoother claws couldn't protect him in a fight. And anyways, everyone hated a traitor. Even dragons who hadn't liked Vulture hated turncoats more. But Keebly hadn't wanted to go to Kosa. He'd gone, after days of arguments, after Thorn mentioned gathering information on the Onyx Warlord for her, after another unexpected fight in a dark alley that had left him limping for a week. But he'd rather have stayed in the den, in his home with Thorn, in spite of all of it. They wouldn't be in Zeros long, hopefully. He hadn't had any luck spying on the Warlord anyways, and plenty of dragons had caught on to his relocation. All he needed to do was help Winter find the dragons responsible for the murder of his brother, which meant he needed more information, which meant needling an already prickly, private, snippy royal about a clearly sensitive story. Of course it's sensitive, Keebly thought pensively. His brother died. Keebly couldn't imagine his own brother being upset at his death. Actually, he'd recognized one of the last assassins in Kosa as one of Sirocco's. Likely, his brother was upset that Keebly wasn't dead yet. So, Keebly ventured, halfway through their meal, when he decided that yes, Winter did intend to spend the remainder of the night in stony, sullen silence. Other than Hyena, who exactly are we looking for? The Icewing's blue eyes slid sideways to Keebly. Look, he continued, when further information seemed unlikely. They all probably worked for Vulture, but he had hundreds of followers, and we didn't catch all of them. If you remember anything, names, or particular spells, or anything to help narrow it down, that would be great. Or details in general? You haven't given me a lot to go off yet. Winter sighed like Keebly had asked him to go sit in the hearth fire, then shifted slightly. "What were you doing when it happened?" Keebly prompted sympathetically. The stoic Icewing was clearly struggling. "We were Escorting a group of diplomats south, Winter said, haltingly. My brother, Hailstorm, and I were traveling with 7 other Icewings as guards. I don't know if you know, he paused, and Keebley thought, wow, good job not saying you assume I'm an uneducated vagrant right out, with affection, as the warrior continued. The Icewings and Nightwings have been at war, on and off, for centuries, he explained, tone halting. I won't bore you with the details, but one incident, among many on both sides that increased hostility, involved the theft of a certain relic. It's been kept in the royal vault for some years now. It was stolen centuries ago by the Icewings before it was lost again. The histories aren't clear on how, and it must have passed around through plenty of owners since. But a few years ago it came back into our possession by chance. Ancient magic relic, That definitely sounded like something his grandfather would be interested in, especially if its theft had once helped perpetuate an ongoing war. Queen Glacier has long sought to end the hostilities between our 2 tribes, Winter said, and Keebley could hear the longing in his friend's voice. He felt a sudden kinship with the Icewing. Keebley wasn't banished, by any means, but he missed his home too. These wars, the dragons of today fight the battles of ancestors long dead. Our queen wants, to stop the bleeding. So she's been negotiating with the Nightwing Queen in an attempt to broker a peace. And the diplomats we were protecting had been sent to return the relic as a show of goodwill. Oh yeah. Keebley could see where this was going. He winced. We were relying on stealth and speed, Winter explained. He was staring at the table now, one claw slowly carving a scratch into the surface. Nobody knew we were returning the relic. It was highly secretive. My brother and I we're related to the Queen, he stumbled. She trusted us to act with discretion. But it was ill luck. His wings slumped. A simple bandit attack, as common as snow in winter, where my brother and I were outnumbered. The dragons we were traveling with were diplomats, peacemakers, not warriors. They didn't stand a chance. He paused, and Keebley kept silent, feeling that for once a flippant joke wouldn't lighten the mood. The bandits, they killed everyone, he said. They stole everything of value, including the relic. I don't know if they even knew what it was. He paused. When I saw Hailstorm fall, I retreated. Shame suffused his voice. I knew I couldn't prevail on my own, and I thought it more important to take news of the matter to the Queen so she could handle it. Inform the Nightwings, or send hunters, or something. It was base cowardice. Winter's voice was poisoned with guilt now. When I returned, he shrugged, the forced gesture unable to hide the obvious pain in his voice. Queen Glacier was furious with me. She was right to be. I should have stayed. Perhaps I could have recovered the relic. Instead, I fled, and now I'm exiled. Keebley stared at the Icewing for a moment. Winter, he said, trying to keep his voice gentle without dipping into condescension. Look, I haven't known you long, but I don't think you're capable of cowardice, he said earnestly. Winter scoffed, but Keebley plowed on. Really, you saved me from those assassins before you even knew me, just because it was the right thing to do. You've saved my life over and over again. I've seen the way you treat other dragons. In a world of those who only care about themselves, you're noble, honorable, brave, certainly. Winter was staring at him. Sticking around to die pointlessly wouldn't have helped anyone, Keebley went on. If your queen didn't know what happened, she might think the Nightwings betrayed her. Your war might begin all over again. Or something else might have gone wrong. Who knows what kind of future crisis you may have averted by making that choice. The Icewing was still staring at him in shocked silence. And look at you now, Keebley said, nodding to the inn and the town around them. You're here, putting yourself in danger even though you don't have to. That's not a coward's choice. A long moment passed in silence. Finally, Winter looked away, shuffling his wings. "You are kind," he said finally, stiffly. "Thank you." Keebly smiled crookedly. "Charming, remember?" he teased. "Tell me about the relic. What did it do?" "I did not know much," Winter admitted. "The Queen entrusted Hailstorm with more detail than I. It is an ancient scroll in a leather case. Rather a large one." He held up his claws to demonstrate. "As for what it can do, supposedly there's nothing it can't do." "Oh yeah," Keebly thought with a wince. "This is definitely taking shape." "Winter," he said carefully, "don't take this the wrong way, but I don't think that was a random bandit attack. Is it possible Vulture found out somehow what you were transporting?" "No," the Icewing said automatically, looking shocked. "We protected that knowledge with utmost secrecy. Only I and my siblings knew about it." Keebly winced. "Just think about it," he tried. "Why would bandits go after a group of 9? Usually they pick easier targets. And why take a scroll? If they didn't know it was magical, that's not something a thief would bother carrying. Not when there's armor and weapons and jewelry to carry already. And why kill everyone? Bandits don't care if their victims survive, usually. Unless they wanted to cover their tracks." Winter's eyes, a blue so pale and sharp Keebly had never seen anything like it before, were fixed on him intently. "You think someone betrayed us?" he whispered. Keebly shrugged. "I may not know royals and treaties and history and all that," he said, "but I know bandits, and I know Vulture. This doesn't sound like a random theft. This sounds like something Vulture planned, purposefully, to steal that relic and get rid of any witnesses who could potentially keep a war from reigniting." Winter stared at him in silence. Then he growled lowly, "Then those bandits aren't the only dragons who need to pay for my brother's death." "And," Keebly added, "if he stole the relic, he may still have it. If he hasn't already sold it, it'll be here in the compound with him. He wouldn't let something like that out of his sight." He could see the Icewing's attention snap to him again at that. "If I could reclaim the relic," he said softly. "If I could avenge Hailstorm and reclaim the relic, maybe I could go home." That's a tall order for an exiled knight, and me, Keebly thought with a wince. "Don't underestimate Vulture," he warned. "He's been in charge this long for a good reason. He's strong, clever, and he surrounds himself with the best and most ruthless killers he can find. Thorn only defeated him the first time because I betrayed him to her. And even then we almost lost," he said, trying to impress on Winter the danger here. "Hyena was just one of his hunters, and not even the best." Winter looked pensive. "If we steal the relic," Keebly mused, "we ruin whatever plan he's cooked up. And you can take it home to your queen and help her save the peace treaty. And probably we don't end up with our heads on spikes outside his compound." For a moment, he wondered if Winter would ignore him. If his silly, noble idea of honor would demand that he try to kill Vulture, even when he was outclassed and outnumbered. But he shouldn't have worried. This was a dragon who'd known when to retreat, when to cut his losses to keep a war from restarting. He'd make the smart choice here. "We steal the relic," Winter decided, though he sounded grudging about it. "Queen Glacier will want to take care of Vulture herself anyways." Late the next afternoon, holed up in their room at the inn, Keebly had cracked the wooden shutters over the window enough to watch Vulture's compound, thinking about what he was getting himself into. It'd been months since he last saw his grandfather in person. During the final attack, when Thorn and her outlaws had poured into his stronghold and finally defeated him. They'd killed dozens of his dragons and imprisoned twice as many, but they'd failed to actually catch him. Vulture had caught sight of Keebly, trailing Thorn like a shadow, and he'd cried, "Traitor!" the accusation ringing across the crowded hall. And then he'd escaped, and ever since, Keebly had been the target of passionate attacks from former Talons and hired killers alike. Was he really about to walk into his grandfather's lair again? For a dragon he'd met a month ago? Yes, Keebly decided. He was. Winter had saved his life, more than once. And he missed home so badly. It was written in every line of his tense form as he ducked between shadows to avoid the baking sun, when he ate desert foods nothing like his own, in the lonely shine of his pristine white scales alone amidst tawny gold and muddy brown. He was so noble, and everyone he devoted his life to protecting had turned their backs on him. Keebly wouldn't be like the ungrateful Icewings. He'd help Winter win his way home. "So," he said into the quiet, cramped room. Winter looked up from where he was sharpening his sword. "You stand out a little." Winter's blue eyes narrowed. "If this is about to be another joke about my—" "Nope," Keebly cut him off, rummaging through his pouches. "Aha," he crowed, pulling out the item he'd been searching for. "Here." He held out his claws. Winter eyed the knit hat, a riot of colorful patterns with small wooden charms dangling from its hem, like it was a dragonbite viper curled around Keebly's claws. "What is that?" he asked acidically. "A hat of disguise," Keebly presented with pride. "The magic that's going to keep you from giving us away the moment we walk into the compound." Winter shot him a disbelieving look. "This?" he clarified. "What's wrong with it?" Keebly demanded. He'd stolen this fair and square, and it was one of his favorite things. Winter plucked the fabric from Keebly's claws delicately. The wooden charms dangled cheerfully. "In the Ice Kingdom," he said, "we enchant more prestigious items." Keebly rolled his eyes. "Well," he argued, "once you cast the spell, you won't need to suffer the indignity of seeing it. You can disguise it away." Winter scowled at him. "Have you used anything like that before?" Keebly asked, and to his relief the Icewing nodded. "It'll only last for an hour, and if anyone touches your freaky cold scales, they'll know something's wrong since it's only an illusion. But you can use it as many times as you need to. And try not to lose it," he added. "That's like my favorite thing." "Of course it is," Winter said despairingly. Then, slowly, "Thank you." The Icewing built his disguise before they left the inn. If anyone wondered where the Icewing Keebly had entered went, they didn't mention it. Already somewhat tall, Winter had shortened his height by about a foot to draw less attention, sharp spines replaced by a ragged sandwing frill. His icy pale colors had faded into dusty brown pocked with darker markings, eyes a dull yellow. His shining armor and sword were hidden by dirty leather. Keebly poked his fake barb with a claw. Disconcertingly, his talon passed right through the illusion, only to bounce off one of the Icewing's real spikes. "Hey," Winter barked, and Keebly skittered away. Outside in the streets, Keebly pulled his hood up to shade his features. He was on the small side and didn't look obviously threatening, so most eyes slid over him easily. He'd tucked his outclaw earring safely away before he'd even entered Kosa, so that wouldn't identify him. As long as he kept out of the open, he'd only have to worry about dragons he actually knew looking at him head-on. The sun was dipping slowly as they made a slow walk around the outskirts of the compound. They kept away from the actual walls, but chose streets close enough to allow them to get a good look. They'd flown as close as they dared the night before to look over the walls, but the squat building was hard to identify. Nothing much had stood out except that the city's oasis was within the compound walls, which meant Vulture controlled the water, but also that outsiders had to be let inside the gates regularly. If he timed it just right, Keebly would get himself and Winter through the gates right before twilight sank into evening. Then, under the cover of darkness, they'd slip away from the crowd and get inside. Winter scowled at him as he fiddled with a clay pot tucked next to a stone building. Keebly breathed a tiny puff of flame, then hurried to catch up with his companion. Making their way back to the line of dragons milling by the gate near the oasis, Keebly nodded. "That's our entry," he said. "The guards watch the dragons who come in for water, but they won't check everyone. Too many dragons come and go. This section will be cut off from the rest of the compound, but by the time we get in, it'll be dark. We can slip away and do some exploring. How stealthy are you?" Winter grimaced. "Not overly," he admitted, and Keebly sighed. "We'll make it work," he decided. "Let's find some water jars." Under the Icewing's judgmental eyes, Keebly paid for 2 hollow, dry gourds meant to hold water, instead of just nicking them when the vendor wasn't looking. Then they joined the crowd of dragons waiting to be let in. Keebly kept close to Winter's side, still a bit smaller than him, and tried to look uninteresting. The 2 of them passed the guards unnoticed, as the shadows stretched ever longer around them. Inside the small courtyard, the oasis was surrounded by dragons filling water jars and skins, with more guards inside overseeing the outsiders. Keebly saw the tattoos of vultures' talons. They were in the right place. He didn't recognize anyone, thankfully. 2 archways led deeper into the compound, with braziers on either side to help light the darkening area. "How are we going to get past the guards?" Winter hissed, nearly silently, as he and Keebly milled around the compound side of the oasis. "They're over by the entrances." "Give it a minute," Keebly said, grinning in spite of himself. He dipped his jar into the water and took a drink calmly. With a boom and the sound of clay shattering, the small dragon flame cacti he'd set with a fuse inside a heavy pot exploded a street away. Shouting erupted as smoke rose, and Keebly shoved Winter for the closest arch as the guards stupidly abandoned their posts to go investigate. "What was that?" Winter demanded, and Keebly hustled them alone through another, smaller courtyard and into a breezy hall. "How did you do that?" "Cactus bomb in a clay pot," Keebly said. "The pot catches the spikes and dulls the explosion so nobody gets hurt. But it's still very loud and distracting. Hey, go right here." They ducked through another door. Keebly had no idea where they were going, but he wanted to get far enough inside the compound that nobody would suspect they were outsiders. "When did you do that?" Winter demanded, and Keebly winked as he shoved him through a curtained archway. They slowed when talons echoed down the hallway, and a few guards rushed past them towards the oasis courtyard. They were in an open-air hallway now, covered from the sun but with wide arches on either side leading to other rooms or courtyards. Sounds echoed through, shouting from outside, the rustle of claws on sand, voices from deeper inside the compound. "We need to look for a treasure vault or a storeroom," Keebly said quietly. "Any doors we see guards outside." They passed other dragons a few more times as they moved in. Keebly recognized someone twice, but he put Winter between himself and the assassins, and it was dark now, and he really was decently stealthy. The nice thing about a cabal of assassins and thieves was nobody really wanted to poke into anyone else's business. They were all already too busy doing something shady themselves. The compound wasn't huge, but they had no idea where they were looking, and Keebly didn't want to look like they were wandering totally without purpose. Most doorways were wide arches, though. Some had curtains or ropes of beads to provide a level of privacy, but in the desert you wanted as much airflow as possible. They'd only passed 2 actual doors so far, one leading down into an unlit stair, and one into what looked like an interrogation room, given the staining on the floor. But neither had seemed like a storeroom. The further in they went, the likelier he was to run into Vulture, Keebly knew. But his grandfather would have attendants and sycophants in his wait, so he was sure he'd hear Vulture coming. They'd have time to duck away. But, a little oddly, he never heard a hint of his grandfather. Not the boom of his raspy voice, nor the rattle of his weapons. "Keebly," Winter hissed, and Keebly winced. He'd warned him not to use his name, but he didn't listen. He froze. Winter was pointing at a heavy stone door. The previous 2 they'd seen had been wood. This was a door that couldn't be burned or smashed. It was guarding something more. And yet, there were no actual guards. Where were they? Never mind. Keebly hurried over to the door and tried it. Locked. "Bingo," he crowed silently. Then, "Keep watch," he ordered, and Winter shifted to hide Keebly from view as he pulled out his lockpicks. The lock took him a moment to untangle, but Keebly was eventually rewarded with a minuscule click, and then he was able to open the door. "Oh yes," he crowed as it pushed inwards. Inside the door was a very small chamber, empty but for another door, and a stone pedestal with a bowl atop it. This door, unlike the first, had no keyhole or handle. Keebly slowly closed the first door behind them to hide them from passerby, and relocked it. The room was almost identical to the treasure vault back in Vulture's old palace. "This is it," Keebly confirmed, investigating the stone pedestal. Then he slipped out a knife and nicked the inside of his left forearm, letting a few drops of blood fall into the stone bowl. "Hey!" Winter cried, jumping forward. It was odd to see his surprise on an unfamiliar face. He grabbed Keebly's talons and the unnatural cold of his scales radiated into Keebly's. "Why did you do that?" Winter demanded. "Arcane lock," Keebly explained. "It's locked to only sandwings," he lied. Winter looked confused. Keebly had to admit, the Icewing was smart. "But why?" he started, but was interrupted by the second door swinging open with a scrape of stone on stone. And there was the treasure vault. Keebly stepped inside the large room. Shelves lined the walls and chests stood in the center. Gold and silver spilled from sacks and boxes and hung from hooks. Rows of spellbooks stood carefully organized. Multicolored bottles of potions and poison lined neatly. Rings, wands, staffs, swords, armor, and countless random items, magical and otherwise, filled the cool stone room. Keebly grinned widely. "Let's find your scroll," he said. "And," he thought with excitement, "find some interesting bits and bobs for our trouble." He recognized a store of greater healing potions and tucked a few into a pouch. Then, despite being unable to identify them, plucked a few other colored vials at random and appropriated those as well. Keebly wasn't a spellcaster, so he wasn't interested in the wands or scrolls or books, but he stroked a wicked-looking silver dagger and took that too. "Hey, so what does that scroll look like?" he said, shifting through a stack of ancient parchment. The room was only big enough for maybe 3 dragons at once, crowded as it was, but there were a lot of scrolls. "Because I can't actually read, so as far as I know, any of these scrolls could be it." He held one up for emphasis. Winter turned to stare at him in surprise. "You can't read?" he demanded. Keebly shrugged. "A bit here and there," he said. "I can read maps." He could read a bit more than that, but not much. He couldn't sift through all these densely packed scrolls, that was for sure. "Unless he took it out, it'll be inside a leather case," Winter said, clearly deciding he had more important things to focus on right now, with little diamonds embedded around the edges. "Leather and diamonds. Got it," Keebly said, sifting through everything. "Ooh," he cooed as he found a huge emerald. He tucked it away for later in an ankle pouch. At the back of the room, sitting atop a closed chest, a silvery mess of chainmail was laid out. Keebly tapped it curiously with a claw, then paused as he saw what lay behind it. A circular leather case, about the size Winter had displayed earlier with his talons. "Winter," he hissed, spinning with the case in his talons. "Is this it?" Winter spun, wing hitting a dangling metal-studded belt with a clang, and Keebly winced. "You found it!" Winter gasped. He hurried over, taking the case delicately. He unlatched the small clasps and peered inside. The scroll seemed old, but wasn't in poor repair, and from what Keebly could see, it was totally blank. "That's it?" he asked. Winter nodded in awe. "I can't believe we found it," he said softly. "Yeah," Keebly agreed. "Now, we'd better get out of here before someone finds us." Winter tucked the scroll into his armor, and it disappeared under the disguise spell. Another reason Keebly loved his hat of disguise. Then, they quickly headed back to the door leading out into the hall. Keebly was careful cracking the door open. Just because there had been no guards before didn't mean there wouldn't be now. But he saw nobody, which actually only served to make him more suspicious. His bomb wouldn't have been that distracting. There'd have been some noise, a bit of fire maybe, just enough to draw their attention for a few minutes, nothing more. What could be going on to pull the guards away from Vulture's treasure vault? Whatever was happening couldn't be good news for them. Keebly wanted out of here as quickly as possible. "Let's go," he said. "If we can find an open courtyard, it's dark enough for us to fly out without being noticed. Especially if you change your disguise to a Nightwing." As they hurried down the hall, it continued to be as strangely deserted as before, and Keebly could only feel his trepidation growing. Vulture's allies were usually gone, sure, spying, attempting to assassinate his grandson, stealing candy from dragonettes or whatever they did. But there should be more dragons here, even if he'd lost over half his crew when Thorn attacked. He heard the voices bouncing off stone right before he and Winter turned a corner. He caught the disguised Icewing's shoulder and pulled him back out of view. "Could you do this? You had one job! Guard a single injured Icewing. What, did he bleed on you to knock you unconscious? I don't know, a second voice, high and pleading with panic. He must have had help. He couldn't have escaped on his own. You'd better pray he doesn't, the first voice growled, and Winter turned to look at Keebly with a questioning look. Keebly shrugged wordlessly. 6 of you in there, and he still escaped. I don't know how it happened, the second voice cried, sounding desperate. You're extremely lucky Vulture isn't due back until tomorrow, came the threatening growl. You have the rest of the night to figure out how to explain to him that you let his Icewing Prince escape. The voices were too far to make out now, but it didn't matter. What they'd heard was enough. Winter stared at Keebly in open-mouthed shock. Keebly was sure the look was mirrored on his own face. How sure are you that your brother's dead? He whispered, voice nearly inaudible. They killed everyone, Winter mumbled dully. I saw him go down, and he was injured, but I didn't see him die. Well, it sounds like he's pretty lively if he's out and escaping, Keebly mused. Hope filled Winter's fake yellow eyes. We can find him, he said. If he escaped, we have to find him before they do. Keebly nodded. So we need to get out of here. It didn't take them long to find a courtyard. Now, Keebly understood why so many guards were missing. They lost a high-profile prisoner, and Vulture wasn't here right now. Everyone was scrambling, praying they could fix this mistake before he returned. Before they got out into the open, he stood by Winter as the Icewing dispelled his disguise long enough to turn into a Nightwing. Now, he blended in with the shadows well, scales pitch black without any armor or accessories to reflect light. Let's go, Keebly said softly. I don't see anyone out there. And sure enough, they took off without anyone shouting or chasing them. The sky was cloudy tonight, hiding the glow of the moons, and it was easy to fly past the compound walls and get over the city again. You'd better keep that hat on, Keebly commented as they drifted idly, looking down at the town. Pinpricks of firelight shone from lanterns and braziers. Sounds and smells and smoke drifted up. Was that a search party of guards? If everyone's looking for an Icewing, there aren't many of those around. You stick out like a broken claw. He could feel Winter's scowl on his back, but Keebly chose to ignore it. See anything? He asked after a moment. No, Winter sighed. Then let's get back on the ground before someone gets curious and comes to get a closer look. They landed back in Zeros in a mostly empty street. It was still early evening. Their theft had barely taken an hour. I bet he didn't think anyone would get into that room but him and Sirocco, Keebly thought smugly, with Rattlesnake and Mom gone. If he's injured, he won't be able to get far, Winter began, but Keebly cut him off with a raised talon, suddenly feeling eyes on them. What? Winter asked. Keebly sidled closer to the disguised Icewing. Do you see anyone? He asked, as quietly as he could. No, Winter replied. His midnight black talon drew close to where Keebly imagined his sword hilt was. Someone's watching us, Keebly warned, flexing his claws. One of Vulture's assassins? The street they were in was narrow. Buildings lined the edges closely. A dragon appeared behind them. Keebly had been looking in a different direction, but he swore she just appeared. She was small, with curved horns and sharp spines. Although her scales were speckled pale sand color, like any other Sandwing, she had an exotic cast to her face that made Keebly nervous. A striped bandana was knotted around her neck, with a few thin necklaces. Winter bumped him with his tail in warning, and Keebly glanced back to the other side of the street. Another dragon had appeared, this one blending in with the darkness nearly as well as Winter. Another Nightwing. She was bigger than the Sandwing, a little. Her scales had a hint of green in them, and little silver diamonds sparkled by her mesmerizing eyes. Her wings were flared slightly, though, and Keebly saw a blade sheathed at her side. You're looking for someone, the Nightwing said, voice smooth and eerie in the quiet, heavy night air. Keebly kept the Sandwing in his sight as Winter responded. Maybe, he said, sounding suspicious. An Icewing, she said, and Keebly spun to stare at her. He didn't recognize her. and anyways, he'd never heard of any Nightwings working for Vulture. "Who are you?" Keebly demanded. She smiled nervously at him. "We don't work for Vulture," she promised. "Yeah, he seems kind of awful," the Sandwing put in from behind them. "How can we believe that?" Winter demanded. The Nightwing shrugged. "Maybe you'll believe it when you see the prisoner we just rescued from him." Winter perked up hopefully. "Hailstorm?" The Sandwing nodded. "Him. Sparkly blue and white, definitely seen better days." "He's hurt?" Winter asked anxiously. The Nightwing nodded after a moment. "He's injured, yes," she said. "We've hidden him from the dragons, searching for him." "We aren't with Vulture either," Winter said. We were looking for Hailstorm." "And the relic," the Nightwing said, and Keebly sighed. He'd been about to mentally congratulate Winter on not mentioning the scroll. Winter was silent for a moment. Then the black of his disguised scales rippled away, replaced with pristine blue-white and silvery armor. "He's my brother," Winter said. "Ooh," the Sandwing said with interest behind them. "He's like me," she added inexplicably. The Nightwing eyed them for a second. "Put that hat back on," Keebly muttered, nudging Winter with his wing. The Icewing obeyed, thankfully, hiding his noticeable scales under unremarkable Sandwing brown. The Nightwing must have come to a decision, because she nodded once, sharply. "I believe you," she said. "Come, we can take you to your brother." And that'll conclude the next installation of the D&D adventure. Although the traveling torches have found the mysterious scroll relic, many questions are still unanswered. Who are these strange dragons who've rescued Hailstorm? What has befallen the Icewing Paladin during his captivity? And what happens when Vulture returns in the morning and finds both his captive and his talisman missing? Stay tuned for the next installment in this story, where we'll meet Moon and Kinkajou. Until then, thanks for watching, and have a blessed day.